All right, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the only coast to coast show that's all about the information economy, new ways of doing business, new systems, new technologies, new methods. It's time for Inside Analysis. Yours truly, Eric Kavanagh, here with one of my best friends in the business. Very smart guy, very forward thinking. He was thinking about important things years and years ago, and that's why we can talk about something today that I think is very impactful for the world of data, especially as data explodes and information systems are reinvented writ large. Things are changing at breakneck speed right now. The transformations are happening everywhere, and they're not all good. Transformation isn't always good. If you don't do it right, it can be very bad. So if you want to do it right, one thing you can focus on is semantics. So our show today, it's just a matter of semantics. We're going to talk about the Semantic Modeling Language, SML, which was proprietary at AtScale, a company called AtScale, founded by Dave Mariani, and now it's open source. So semantics, a lot of you know what semantics is. You mean one thing with a certain word, someone means something else, and you go across industries, and these semantic differences make a big difference. And so it's important to know the semantics of your organization versus the semantics of some other organization. And it's especially important, and we'll talk about this later in the show, with these new large language models, these new foundational models. They're very, very big and very interesting. They could do lots of great stuff, but they don't know your business. And in order for you to get value from them, they need to know your business. So we're going to talk about that today. And with that, Dave Mariani, welcome back to Inside Analysis. Tell me about you're open sourcing your semantic modeling language. What was the impetus for that, and what does it mean?
Yeah, thanks, Eric, for having me on. Look, semantics and semantic layers have been around for a long time, predating AtScale. When I started the company 10 years ago, they've been always embedded in like BI tools. Traditionally, every BI tool has its own internal semantic layer.
Right.
Databases in the form of stored procedures or schemas, like you often hear about the medallion architecture, bronze, silver, gold tables, and reporting tables. So semantics have existed for a long time. The problem is that they've all been single purposed, focused on an individual company's technology, and it only works for that technology. So what we've just set out to do is to say, hey, you know what? Semantics are so important to the business that we should be able to describe and build them and define them once and then use them many. So write once, use many. We started with a universal semantic layer, and we developed our own sort of way of encoding those semantics in a semantic model. And so we released about a year and a half ago now our new platform that is not just a visual platform for building these semantic models, but also it's based on code. So it's based on YAML, YAML structure, and we call it SML for Semantic Modeling Language. So the idea here is like we had really sort of two sort of impetuses here to open source that. So first of all, we're not alone anymore in doing this universal semantic layer platform. There's other sort of companies out there and big ones like Microsoft with Power BI, like Google with Looker. We have some open source companies like DBT that are out there that are creating, they have created their own semantic modeling languages. And so what we heard from our customers and from our prospects and from industry analysts is like, this is getting out of hand. Can we please like centralize or do something where we can select a standard so that we can interoperate between those tools? But that's just one small piece, because what about all those semantic layers that are already embedded in those BI tools like MicroStrategy and Tableau and Power BI and business objects, and I can go on and on and on. Cognos. So what about those? And so what we did is we created this open source project. So we had a Rosetta Stone of semantics. So we can start to build, and we'll see this, translators that will take internal semantic layers and produce them and allow them to interoperate with other tools, semantic layers, and other semantic layer platforms. So twofold. Let's go ahead and mine the embedded semantics that are already in the tools where we've like poured millions of hours of IP into. So let's get them out and get those semantic layers, internal semantic layers, useful outside of just one tool. And secondly, let's create the ecosystem of semantic layer platforms such that we can interoperate with each other. So may the best, functionality and the best user experience win, rather than trying to force customers to pick and choose a particular language,
Yeah.
and be sort of and be being pinned in the future to that language. Let's interoperate.
Yeah, I love that. And it's funny. I remember back in 2001 or 2002, in 2002 I'd become self-employed again, and so I went out and got myself some clients. And one of my first clients was a company called QualAware, and we were talking about metadata management. And I kept saying, I talked to all these vendors, and they all have their own metadata layer, and they're all metadata repository, their own proprietary metadata repository. I said, wouldn't it make sense to have a sort of generic metadata layer that we could all sort of subscribe to and understand, and then use something like that as a basis? And I just laugh about that today because what are we talking about? We're talking about trying to semantically model instances or constructs inside these information systems that are largely driven by metadata. And it's
Mhm.
usually the discrepancies between this metadata field and that metadata field that cause trouble, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And it's there's so much time that has gone in and continues to go into, every business user who's using a tool like Power BI or Tableau are building a semantic layer when they're building a dashboard. We
Right.
force them to do that today.
Oh,
And
really?
and so
Interesting.
it's like it's a because they have to model the data, they have to describe what gross margin is or what product means. And we want them to do that in a reusable fashion once, so that if we do that, first of all, we have more users that can go in and just get the work done, right? We don't a business user doesn't want to build a semantic layer. They want to get their outcome. They want to build that data product so they can answer some questions. But we force them to become that semantic layer builder.
Hmm.
What we're trying to do is just say, you know what? Let's separate out those personas. Maybe you do want to create a semantic model as a Tableau user, as a Tableau visualization expert. Great, you can do that. But at the same time, maybe you just want to consume. Maybe you just want to build a visualization to answer a question you have.
Hmm.
Do you have to understand databases? Do you have to understand how to connect to a Snowflake or Databricks and understand, what's gold, silver, and bronze? And then
Right.
how do I relate these tables together? And by the way, I'm going to create a definition for gross margin. And Eric, you're going to create a one that is completely different. And when we try to compare reports, they're not going to match. It's
Right.
just a recipe for failure. So we just want to make that. We just want to make that write once, read many.
Yeah. No, I like that a lot because first of all, especially at larger organizations, but even smaller companies, you're going to have multiple different information systems that are being used, and they're all going to have their own value. And let's face it, users want to continue using the tools that they know. It's very difficult to take away a tool someone's using and say, okay, now use this new tool. It's going to take time for them to skill up. It's going to take time for them to kind of understand how this thing works. All these tools are slightly different. So that's always a bit of a challenge. So, what can you do that would allow you to semantically align these different systems? And the answer is the semantic layer. That's the key, is having a layer. And so, if you have an open sourced modeling language that can be used by anyone and learned by anyone, I mean, look at SQL. I remember when all the NoSQL stuff started back in like, the mid aughts, basically 2005, 6, 7. Everyone's like, oh, NoSQL, it's such a pain. It
Mm-hmm.
slows things
Mm-hmm.
down. So you had like eventual consistency, for example, with some of these NoSQL engines. But what happened eventually? They had SQL on Hadoop, right? It's like,
Yes.
okay. They basically said they caved. They said, all right, we admit it. We screwed up. Everyone loves SQL. Why? Because it's a standard, it's well understood, and it works lots of different places. So even though, and like the latest approved version is like, it's not even young, right? In terms of the ANSI
Yeah.
SQL, right? It's like years ago, but it's a standard. And so within the world of a standard, you can all focus on what makes your business special. And you don't have to worry about reinventing wheels all the time. Isn't that the big win here?
It is, and it's such a good analogy that you picked on for SQL, because think about what SQL did in terms of opening up data to really to analytics. It's been huge, but SQL wasn't born as an analytical query language. It was really born as more of a transactional query language, and over time we sort of added some more sort of analytical add-ons to it. When it comes to windowing functions, so we can do period over period and things like that. But what we never really did, Eric, was really invent or standardize around an analytical query language.
Hmm.
So we had OLAP, but OLAP even has its own versions and its own different sort of instantiations, with probably Microsoft's MDX being the closest to a standard. But we're seeing this opportunity now of what is semantics and the semantic layers for business. It is like it's that one step closer to the business, right?
Hmm.
So
Right.
it uses SQL, and maybe it uses SQL as its underlying fundamental constructs to go and query the actual raw data itself. But it's a logical language with dimensions, measures, hierarchies, attributes that allow you to build that business friendly layer on top of that SQL technical layer.
Oh,
So I
interesting.
really see like the semantic modeling language as that sort of that missing piece of what is a business language that business users can interact with to be able to answer their questions. And today we have one choice. It's SQL. And SQL is easy for me because I'm an engineer. It's not easy for somebody who's operating in Excel who just wants to say, what's my gross margin by product by time, by division.
Yeah.
That's how they answer the question. They don't answer. They don't write a SQL query that does joins,
Right.
left outer joins and inner joins. That's not how they speak
Right.
about data.
That's right. Yeah, you're right. To get to that level, you really need to have some training, and most business people don't have that training, and we don't want to require most business people to go and get that training. We want to be able to have an interface, a natural language interface, ideally. I mean, I'm old enough to remember Progress Easy Ask when that came out in like
Mm.
2000 and
Mhm.
I don't know what it was, 4 or something, where you would
Mhm.
type in a natural language query and it would give you the SQL it generated underneath, and then you could tweak that SQL. But it was, at least it was a way to help people understand how the words related to the functions in the query, and that's
Mhm.
education. We talk a lot these days about data literacy. I'm preparing now for Data Universe next year. We did the first one ever in April in New York City this year, and we're preparing for the next one. And I'm seeing a lot of propositions come in, or presentation abstracts for data literacy. And let's face it,
Mhm.
if there's one thing that semantic understanding can do for you, it's help you become more literate, not just with data in general, but with your company's data in the context of your business, right?
Mhm. Yeah, and it's so different across different businesses. Like, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves because, but it's like it is, you need something to basically document in an operational way, document what your business logic is, and that's really
Right.
where the semantic layer really fits, right? It's
That's
like it's
interesting.
not just a data catalog. A data catalog, it's great. It's a glossary. It's a glossary of terms, great. But I need to then take that glossary and operationalize it into giving me the data. And so a semantic layer does both of those. It
Mm,
acts as the business glossary, but then allows you to ask questions of your data using those business terms, and translate that into SQL ultimately
right.
to be
Right.
able to get the answer that the business needs.
Yeah, and that's the real key, and that's why I'm so excited about semantics and about you open sourcing SML, the semantic modeling language, because it is that interface in between all the ideas in my head and the words I use to describe something, and then the actual data that's running the business. And you made a very good point too. And the way that people use at scale is you will actually build out schematics essentially that allow for this translation to take place. And let's face it, you want that. It's like a filter. It's a very sophisticated filter that you put onto your binoculars as you're looking at the business and trying to understand what's happening. It allows
Mhm.
you to understand what these numbers mean in which particular context. And that is not very easy to do. I mean, especially when you're starting to deal with massive amounts of data, you can't just open an Excel spreadsheet and look at the numbers and understand what's happening. No, there's a lot more that goes into it. And the semantic layer I think really is the enabling function or mechanism that allows people to better understand what all that data means, right?
Yeah, and you said something very important there, which is it's because it's not just to help that individual, it's also to help teams, right? To be able to collaborate using the same terminology. And so, we really focused, on our early mission with AtScale was about democratization. We want to make sure that that user who is a spreadsheet user can be as powerful using a semantic layer as somebody who's using a SQL notebook or a notebook and writing queries directly. We want them to be the equivalent or even more powerful. But is that collaboration is really important, and so it also comes down to it's not just the consumption of semantics, it's also the production of those semantics,
Yeah.
because we want to be able to have building blocks that different teams can use, where that those building blocks are how they have their shared knowledge of the business. So
Wow.
I always use gross margin. Take that gross margin calculation. Well, every business unit needs to know gross margin. Now, it may be different for their particular division, but if gross margin is the way that we're managing the business, then we need to make sure that we're all calculating gross margin the same.
Right.
Wouldn't it be nice if somebody, whether it's a business unit or a central group, could define that calculation, and then all the business units could use that calculation across the business, across all their data products? It really is a killer from a not just a productivity perspective, but driving consistency in how people actually talk about their own businesses.
Right. Well, and just to explain to people, it basically becomes a block, like you say, a building block that you then load into a report, and now it pulls all the data from these different systems and gives you the gross margin, so you don't have to go there and build some incredibly complex Excel spreadsheet formula, which is what people have been doing, right? So some person back there somewhere built out this great formula in his Excel spreadsheet, and no one else knows where it is. Well, that's good for that person, but it's not good for the rest of the business. And what we want is to democratize not just the data, but access to the data and meaningful access to the data. And that comes through the semantic layer. But folks, don't touch that dial. We'll be right back here on Inside Analysis talking to Dave Mariani of AtScale. We're going to have some fun with semantics. Stand by. We'll be right back. All right, folks, back here on Inside Analysis talking to Dave Mariani, CTO and founder of AtScale, a very cool company working on semantics. And Dave, I do want to talk to you about the old way of doing things and the new way of doing things, and then the sort of impending way of doing things, which is creeping up all around us. The old way is all this ETL, all these batch processes that we go around and around and around for years and years. I wrote about this today on LinkedIn, saying I've been talking about this for over 16 years, like way back when. I thought, wouldn't it make sense if we came up with a better way to access all this data instead of moving everything around again and again and again and again? And that is happening now with data pipelines. So data pipelines are sort of a more sophisticated version of extraction, transform, and load, or extract, load, and transform, however you want to do it. And they give you a visual way to represent where data is coming from, what's happening to it, and where it's going. And you've now enabled some way to build semantic filters into these data pipelines, right? Tell me about that.
Yeah, so this is another important part of having a semantic modeling language, because if you think about it, Eric, right, there's been a big divide between the data engineers and the business, and traditionally the data engineers prepped the data, and they stopped at probably a table, like loading data into a table. And at that point, it's like throwing their hands up. Okay, the business, you now take over and you do that last mile, right?
That's funny.
Well, if we have a semantic modeling language that a data engineer can use, we can sort of have those data pipeline engineers go a little further into building some, I like to call them semantic building blocks. So a data set is one of the objects in SML. And a data set is either a query or a mapping to a table with calculations. And so you can think about it, right, as like, rather than just stopping at a physical table that has a bunch of names that with underscores that only a data engineer could love,
Right.
You could go a little bit further and hang some semantic meaning off of that table. It becomes a data set, which is now a building block
Hmm.
that a semantic modeler could then plug and play with. And so
Interesting.
the data engineer has done a little bit more of the job of what was traditionally be the business user, and made them more productive. And I like to think of it, Eric, as like it's almost like joining of hands, rather than that physical wall that we have today between data engineers and the business. I really like to see them as a more collaborative effort where which makes everybody better. It makes the data engineers understand why they're writing those tables to begin with. It lets the business understand where the data is coming from and why those data engineers are so darn important for me getting the data I need.
That's interesting. So in production, when you actually do this stuff, is that basically an attribute, or is it another field, or how does it actually manifest? Where do the semantics fit? And then how does someone see it as they're using it? Because I understand what you're saying is basically you're putting a descriptor onto what was a fairly arcane construct to help other people understand what this means and where it goes. How does it
Mm-hmm.
actually instantiate?
In my example of a data set would be a YAML object. So it's a
I
YAML, it could
see.
be a file. And so
Okay.
that data engineer can go ahead, and it's all stored in Git. So Git is the source of truth, just like they have their software, they have their pipeline code, which hopefully is CI/CD friendly and all stored in version control and the like, and deployed that way. They could do the same thing with deploying semantic objects. In my case, that data set can now be one step further than just the DDL to produce the table and to update that table. The other artifact is a YAML file defining that table as a data set with all its extra metadata that makes it much more useful downstream.
Interesting. So they're labeled Legos, basically. When you put the Legos together,
Yes.
it's got the labeling on there so you understand what you're connecting, and it's not something that is just completely over the head of the business user, basically, right?
I love that. I love that analogy. I know it's overused with Legos, but I think of it as like, when you used to build a house in Legos, there would be a door.
Right.
Well, the door was a special type of part, wasn't it? And that door had its place, and it would go and be useful in certain situations. It wasn't just a a 2x3 block, generic block with a different color. It actually had a meaning and had a use. And so I kind of think of semantic objects the same way. It's like a table is just not a table. A table, it could be meaningful in conjunction with some other larger set. And so once you know how those things can plug and play, then we can let the business build the house, and let the data engineers build all the parts that ultimately will go into the construction of that house.
That's very interesting. I'm seeing now better than I ever really have how this kind of approach will help business users get things done because what traditionally has happened is you throw things over the wall. You talked about the wall
Mhm.
instead of you're holding hands, right? Well, that wall is really the problem. And because you can't see on the other side of the wall, you throw something over and you wait and then they throw something back. And in the old black box days, like you never knew what was going in there. You just knew that you got something that worked or that didn't work. But what you want to enable here is for the handing over of building blocks that are named and can be understood by business users. And that facilitates not just building this data product or that data product, but learning how to build data products and really learning to
Mhm.
appreciate what a data product is and how it can be inserted into your view of the business. Because that's what you're talking about is improving efficiency of operations, improving efficiency of the business, and part of that is improving awareness about what's actually happening and where the drivers are in your business. I mean, that's half of what you're trying to figure out every day is what's driving our business right now? Where are we not doing as well as we should be doing? Where are we doing maybe better than we should be doing? And all of that is baked into the data tied to the semantics, right?
Yeah, and you know what I really want to encourage is that there's not just humans building that, right? Like you can build these semantic objects with code and rules. And my example is, a game, online game developer. If you know that at all, that business is like those game developers are tagging basically every event so they can understand how people are using the game and where they're getting stuck and where they're enjoying it and where they could be maybe buying purchasing more add-ons and the like. So everything is instrumented. That
Interesting.
instrumentation is itself metadata. So if I should be able to write some glue that takes that instrumentation and that metadata, it automatically generates the semantic objects. So at the end of the day, if I do it really right, I may be able to build semantic models programmatically without a human ever being involved. And
Wow.
maybe I have to build the base model, but I can definitely enhance that semantic model automatically using metadata, and really truly build build a data information system that can basically describe and describe itself for the
Wow.
business.
Wow. That's pretty cool. You actually got me thinking when you talk about gaming, and there's this whole new space that's really ramping up very quickly now called FinOps, where you're able to
Mm-hmm.
understand the financial side of cloud operations, which until recently were pretty obscure. I mean, it was pretty difficult. Even you couldn't do it just a handful of years ago. You couldn't do much in that space. But now, because I'm sure of some instrumentation, we're getting better and better at understanding, okay, how much is this cloud instance costing for compute versus storage versus network costs and all these different things. And we're starting to get much, much better. I'm seeing a lot of startups in that space where they will manage your SaaS applications. You kind of run through them and they're pulling a feed of data from these environments and giving you some readout on what's really happening. Well, that's
Mm-hmm.
incredibly powerful because then you can start to better understand what it's really costing you to run this application in AWS or that application in Azure or different things along these natures. And they also help you understand the inner workings of your business because
Mm-hmm.
how these little systems talk to each other, that's what's running your business right now. And the better you can understand that, the better off you're going to manage it. And that's especially true if you have a semantic layer on top of it and can
Mm-hmm.
figure out why it's costing things and what which functions, which business units, all these chargebacks you're hearing about, that's all driven by FinOps, right? And I think that
Mm-hmm.
what you're talking about in the gaming world could probably be applied to that whole world of FinOps. What do you think?
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's some of the seeded some of the seeded models in this open source repository are FinOps models. So it's a Snowflake cost model, it's a Google BigQuery cost model, Databricks
Right.
cost model. How we just built a semantic model and put it in the open source library that actually does the logic for you tied to those system tables that those
Wow.
different platforms produce. So it's not just so we can actually include in that open source SML not just the definition of the language, but also open source models that can be applied to known schemas that allow you to sort of get that for free,
Wow.
and then you can plug and play in anything you want. But to your point, like it's like a lot of times we think that the business is like at odds with IT, and IT is over trying
Right.
to well, they are a lot of times, honestly, but from a cost perspective, IT wants to sort of manage costs, and the business does too. But with FinOps, you can actually put it into terms where the business can understand, right? And the answer, the question is like, well, okay, every time we run or render this dashboard, it costs us $100. So,
Right.
and
Right.
you're saying the business that you want us to render that every 5 minutes.
Right.
Well, is it really worth 5 minutes every 5 minutes, $100? Is it really
Right.
worth that, or would it be okay if we ran it once an hour? And the business will say, yeah, I didn't realize it cost that much. Yeah,
Right.
we could run it once an hour. So
That's right.
to me, that's like the business can work together for the behalf of the greater good if they just have data available to understand what is the cost of what I'm asking to do and is it worth it?
Yeah. Well, and I'm glad you mentioned this about your open source offering of the semantic modeling language. So what you're saying is you're open sourcing not just the language, but also templates or models that companies can grab and deploy immediately to start understanding their business, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you think about like in the world of SaaS, these are all known schemas. And so, why force different customers using different technology to have to reinvent those semantic models when you could have those be curated in the open source community?
Oh
so
yeah.
people can plug and play. Like in our business, Eric, it's like, we use Sage Intacct, it's Intact for our accounting. We use Salesforce for our CRM. We use Google Analytics for web tracking, Marketo for marketing automation. We have models for all of those. So I could
It's
then plug
amazing.
and play those models together and get a complete view of my business, without ever having to lift a finger.
See, like that is such an important point right there because what happens is, especially in all these SaaS environments, is you have, as you suggest, a handful of different tools. Well, what's happening today? Sometimes you'll pull data from them, put it in a data warehouse, for example. I'm even seeing a lot of really interesting use cases for immediate analytics, like don't even wait for the warehouse. But again, you're pulling data out and analyzing it somewhere else. What you need to be able to do is to semantically align these systems. I mean, really that's what master data management was all about. It was a very hard semantic alignment from one information system to another, but it was mostly analytical. I mean, you could do some operational stuff, but it costs a lot of money to do that. It costs a lot of money to do that kind of real-time reconciliation. But what you're talking about is the I think the best solution I've heard yet for being able to really align these different, very important systems, marketing automation, sales automation, financial record keeping, all these things. You want to be able to very easily jump from one view to another view and have all that make sense. And that's not the case right now. I mean, it's in the case for some
It's
companies, I
siloed.
suppose. It's
It's
very
absolutely
siloed.
siloed.
It's very
It's
siloed.
absolutely silent. And you think about every business has like a range of different off the shelf software packages, but they all have different combinations of them.
Right.
So one of the things that the semantic modeling language SML allows you to do is to create a composite model. So for AtScale, we have an AtScale composite model, which models our business that has those different subsystems related. So now, for example, I can actually say, how much is that Marketo-based marketing campaign
Right.
cost me, and what is the ROI of it? Because
That's
I can see what the
crazy.
cost is in the Sage Intact. I can also see in Salesforce how much revenue it brought in, and now I can do the attribution to say what is the ROI of that campaign,
That's
and
crazy.
should I keep doing it? It's hard to
It's
do otherwise.
I mean, it's almost impossible to do otherwise, and that's why I'm so excited about this because you're connecting these big dots in the
Mm-hmm.
organization, and these are big, important departments. Sales, I would say, is the most important department there is. If you're not selling anything, you're not going to stay in business long. Marketing feeds sales. Operations takes care of when marketing and sales succeed, right? Accounting keeps track of everything that happened, and then administration and oversight and strategy and all that stuff. It's really important to be able to align these systems semantically in order to understand, in order to do that ROI, in order to do, wait for it, TCO, total cost of
Yeah.
ownership. I mean, I would argue hitherto, TCO, give me a break. You don't know what the TCO is. You just don't know. It's very, very difficult to ascertain that kind of thing. But folks, don't touch that dial. We're going to get right back here with Dave Mariani of AtScale talking all about semantics. We'll be right back. All right, folks, back here on Inside Analysis, talking to Dave Mariani, CTO and founder of AtScale. They have open sourced their semantic modeling language, and it's not just a language, it's a bunch of models too. It's templates, basically, so you can grab and start aligning the meaning between your marketing automation, your sales automation, your FinOps, all this stuff. You can finally connect these in a meaningful way. What we kind of used to call master data management, but really it's like master semantic management, I suppose, is one way to describe it. But I tipped off Dave that I was going to throw a curveball at him today and give him my new big idea, which I literally just came up with today as I was typing on LinkedIn, and I realized, and I've paid attention for a while, and I'm saying to the world of business and data people that the powers are inverting. Like things are changing dramatically. And the reason why is because you have these foundational models that are so powerful, whether it's ChatGPT or Gemini or some of the smaller language models, for example. There's a whole bunch of industry ones out there. They're very powerful, but they're external. So now it's like they're a center of gravity. Well, how do you deal with that? You're basically turning the world inside out. Now it's outside in instead of inside out. How do I leverage that power? Well, you can use your own enterprise data, but be careful. Don't point algorithms at sensitive data or at your IP, for example. So you got to watch out for that. but you have these large language models that are so powerful, they're pulling a lot of energy. Well, in between that, the sort of flywheel that you can build is your RAG model, your retrieval augmented generation. And there are all sorts of tools and techniques like a vector database for your embeddings and all these things you can do. What I realized today is RAG is like the new middleware. And we have to figure out how we're going to protect our enterprise data, but open it up for use by these RAG models to be able to leverage the tremendous power of these foundational models. So I'm just going to throw that over to you, Dave. And I have to say, I think your semantic modeling language could be a key ingredient in a very powerful RAG model. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm a little exactly. It's our third use case, and it might be the killer use case for a semantic modeling platform or semantic layer platform, Eric, because it's large language models are trained on generic data that's out there in the internet.
Right.
They have no visibility into a business's own operations, and this terminology and definitions are different across every single business. And there's no way that the generically trained LLM can understand that. So really, the semantic layer becomes, and semantics become sort of the glue that allow the LLM, which is trained on, massively trained on being able to help humans get answers. It's a translation layer to allow the business to the LLM to interact with the business's data without going in the other direction.
Right.
So a semantic layer platform could be an internal tool to a business that is that glue that helps them actually translate a human question into a business question. And here's the key: deterministically.
Right.
So
Ooh.
every single time I ask that question, I'm going to get the same answer. And today you cannot do that with a off-the-shelf LLM because we've proven and other people have proven if a query requires 4 or more tables, you have a 0% chance that it's going to give you the accurate result. Zero.
Wow.
So all it
Wow.
takes is 4 tables for that to be completely useless. And the semantic layer platform is what changes all that
Hmm.
because not only does it have the metadata to translate what is gross margin or gross demand for my business, what does that mean to my business and what's the definition, it also has those relationships between those tables already predefined. So now I can get that answer at the same time regardless of how many times I ask for it.
Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. And, I remember reading just recently about graph rag and how compelling a story graph rag is and how important knowledge graphs are. So companies that have
Mm.
invested in knowledge graphs, there are a bunch of companies that have been around, like Ontotext is one. Knowledge graph is a very, very useful thing. In many ways, it's very similar and I think aligned with the concept of semantic modeling, right? I mean, when you're
Mm-hmm.
building a knowledge graph, you're kind of building a semantic model. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and we use a knowledge graph internally for our query optimizer. I mean,
Right.
that's how we do it, right?
Right.
So if you think about a dimensional model, nodes in the graph are levels, attributes, measures, are nodes in the graph, and those nodes can interconnect. And then ultimately, when you want to run a query that actually generates a SQL query, you can't just have one query that joins every single table in your system. You'll never get
Right.
an answer back. You
Right.
use that knowledge graph to prune the nodes so that
Right.
ultimately you can construct a query that only accesses the tables and the relationships that are needed to satisfy that prompt.
That's very interesting. And the other concept that's becoming very prevalent now is hybrid search. And I think this really is going to be the key because you're going to be fusing the text generative capacity of the large language model with the deterministic results from a SQL query. And that's really
Mm-hmm,
what you want, right? You want to be able to
mm-hmm.
leverage this descriptive power of these foundational models without jeopardizing the accuracy of all the systems we've spent the last 40 years building, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah, it's like I have a friend who's in the business. He built a chatbot for websites, and he's like, it's like we're doing all this stuff with unstructured data, but not with databases. And it's like, well, yeah, it's because most people are not. It's like think of like, yeah, we have a ton of unstructured data, but the data we probably care about the most, we took the time to put into a structure.
Right.
Right. I mean,
That's a good way to
that's
put
kind
it.
of that kind of tells you how important that is, right? Because you took the time to actually make it a structure, put it in a structure, and so that stuff is now like really inaccessible to LLMs as we see it.
Mm.
And I think if you ask each business to have to go ahead and create that for themselves, they're not in that business. They're not in the business to create a search engine for their particular business. They just want to be able to integrate, like you said, outside in, and be able to plug and play and make that work for them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting. And the deterministic world is very important for business. I mean, I'm working on an abstract for a data universe for next year, and I asked a rhetorical question, what part of your business can be wrong 20% of the time? Not much. And if you look at these models, I saw a webcast the other day with Andrew Ng, who's like one of the true thought leaders in the space, and a couple of these young kids working with him, and they were all excited about getting your model from 80% accuracy up to 85%, or maybe even up to
Yeah,
9%. It's like, okay, well, what part of your business can
not
be
good
wrong
enough.
10% of the time? Like, the
Not
answer
good
is
enough.
almost nothing.
Not
Almost
good enough.
nothing. Right.
It's like
So,
all that does is give you a directional answer. It's like it's not an answer that you're going to go take to your board meeting. And
right.
and a lot of a lot of the whole natural language query sort of products that are being sort of being developed out there. I mean, their use case, their persona is an executive. What executive is going to be okay with being wrong? 10% of the time. Nobody.
You can't.
You can't. It's just not going to work,
Right.
and it's not good enough to be directionally correct.
Yeah. I mean, that's an excellent point. And so right now, all these use cases are internally focused. I mean, this is the math I've done in my head to realize, all this time we've spent building business intelligence tools and analytics tools, that's all decision support. It's basically suggestions, informed suggestions about what the data says to help me decide what to do next in my business. It's not customer facing, it's not partner facing, it's not external, it's internal. And I was at the Confluent event a couple of weeks ago in Austin, and one of their head of research and development basically told us, look, all the use cases we know in production for Gen AI are internally focused. And that's
Hmm.
fine. You can help and you can see it like, I will say a lot of people harsh on Twitter these days. I've been pretty impressed by the technological innovations they've done over it. Now it's called X. And when they came out with Grok, I had just spoken at the Data Universe conference this past year, and what I said is that the future of news reporting is largely going to be systems of record fused to large language models, ideally with a
Hmm.
semantic model in between, to just show you what's happening in real time. And that's what Grok now does. If you go to Twitter and you sign up, if
Hmm.
you I think you have to be a paid member to see the Grok news stories, but that's what they are. And it will tell you Grok makes mistakes. Verify its output because it will. It gets stuff wrong. I used Gemini the other day. It got something very completely wrong. I was like, that's wrong. I guarantee that's wrong. So it's wrong still, but it's creeping closer. And I think that this semantic layer that you talk about is going to be a crucial component. You got 1 minute. Go ahead.
Yeah, that feedback loop is really important. I just wanted to put a riff on what you just said there. Is that and what semantics can also do to give confidence in the answer is to show you where it came from.
Right.
And so for me, any system that uses natural language query needs to show the user where it came from and also ask them whether it was correct or not, and then actually
Ah,
do something with that feedback.
right. Right. So
And so
right,
it
build
can
it
get
back into the
better.
model. Right.
Yes,
Well,
exactly
folks,
right.
podcast bonus segment is coming up next year with Dave Mariani on Inside Analysis. We'll be right back. All right, folks, time for the podcast bonus segment here on Inside Analysis with Dave Mariani of AtScale. And we were just chatting in the break there about search. And Dave tells me that Google's search percentage of the market is like 50% now. It used to be like 92% or some crazy
Hmm.
amount. And I've noticed, I remember when ChatGPT came out, it got real popular. And what happened? All of a sudden, Google search changed. And you can tell now when you go searching for things, it thinks for a second as to whether or not it's going to go deterministic old way or synthetic new way and give you its little Gen AI developed answer. And it's interesting because This Gen AI stuff has absolutely revolutionized search and just in time, because before it was just a list of links and you just had to go do your homework. Now it's giving you the answer, but is the answer correct? And it's very strange because sometimes it's just not correct. And I'm pretty sure that's hurting Google's reputation because we trusted them to point us to the right stuff. And now they're trying to catch up to Microsoft and ChatGPT. And they may have rolled it out a bit too prematurely. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's by the way, it's search ad market share is
I see.
50%, just to be clear. And the reason that is like, are you a Prime member, Amazon Prime member,
Oh,
Eric?
I am. Yeah, sure.
Okay, so when you're searching for a product, you know you're going to buy it on Prime. So don't you use the Prime search box? So
Yeah.
search box, I know I do.
Wow.
So Google lost all those product searches and all the ad revenue that
Wow.
comes along with that. And now it's so TikTok is now announcing a new ad product to allow people to target advertisers to be able to use targeted keywords for TikTok
Wow.
attributes. And Facebook has been doing that for years, right? But so it's like, and then you got tools like Perplexity, and then AI has really just changed everything there. So
Wow.
I think that it's like, it just goes to show you that that took a long time. Probably took what, 15, 20 years maybe to get to
Right.
the point where we can actually have this conversation about, the
Wow.
Google hegemony that's like is under threat. But that's what it takes. It's like see changes in technology to upset the cart and give, and give new sort of approaches
Yeah.
the floor.
Well, I tell you what, a good friend of mine, a guy named Jimmy Malone, is a friend of mine from Texas. He studied for a couple years with the Dalai Lama's right-hand man. So he learned all about that view of the world. Very interesting characters, you might imagine. And he would say pithy things now and again. And the thing he said that applies here perfectly, he said, things don't happen quickly until they do. Right?
That's a that's great.
And
I
a
love
good
that.
one. It's like, whoa.
That's a good one.
I
That's
mean,
a good one.
it's like floodwaters, right? Everything was fine in Asheville, North Carolina until
Hmm.
the floods came in. I mean, that's a very dark reference, but it's reality and you have to be prepared. And let's face it, they saw it coming, man. I mean, Google, they're still a powerhouse. They're not going anywhere anytime soon, but they sure did feel distracted for a few years. If you look at where they spent all their money and some weird stuff, Alphabet and all these things are going on, and they're throwing tons of money left and right, and just not really paying attention to core business, not paying attention to competitive analysis, what other companies are doing. And to your point, Amazon has been challenging them now, Facebook, TikTok. I mean, these are powerful engines, and it's like, where is Google going to fit in the new world? They're putting a lot of effort into their enterprise software, but one of the things I've heard about them that's kind of their Achilles heel is they'll throw a whole bunch of money at something and it starts to get somewhere and then they kill it and it goes away.
Hmm.
In fact, I said that
Yeah.
to a Googler, an ex-Googler. He goes, "Yeah." He goes, "We actually have a whole website that tracks all the Google
Yeah.
projects that were killed, and it's like a long list."
That's something that scares the bejesus out of a business person is to
Sure.
be orphaned.
Yeah.
That's it may be okay with the consumer. They'll move on and find something else. But for a business, that's
Yeah.
scary.
It's tough. And that's why you want a good partner ecosystem. It's why you want to be good to your partners, work with them, collaborate. And you know what enables better collaboration? Good semantics, right?
And open source semantics too.
Oh,
So it's like
that's right.
let's all do this together, huh? That's
Yeah.
the message.
Well, and I've been a huge fan of open source ever since it was about 2005. I was working for the Data Warehousing Institute, and I just started doing some research. And that's when I realized in '05, the Apache web server had just passed Microsoft's web server as number one in the market. And I was like, wow, that's pretty interesting. And I remember back then thinking to myself, wait a minute. So I was researching service-oriented architecture and then open source technology. I'm thinking, huh, this is interesting. So if you have the service-oriented architecture and you're leveraging open source, it should be easier to sort of mix and match components and to get a more agile information architecture. But I got to tell you, it took about 10 years longer than I thought for that to really materialize. And it was when cloud came to fruition that it all started
Mhm.
coming together. And that's really like 5, 10 years ago that it really started to happen. Final thoughts. What do you think?
Yeah, like look, it's like integration is tough, and if you have to integrate yourself from the ground up, it's like that's not what we do for a living. I do that for a living, but
Right.
businesses don't do that for a living. So the
Right.
the key is to interoperate and to be able to plug and play. The cloud's made that happen. I think Gen AI is really sort of upset the apple cart. I think we now need to bring Gen AI to business, and
Yeah,
I think that we can't expect businesses to build their own large language models. We got
right.
to give them the tools to take the leverage all that cost and expense into building and carefully curating those LLMs into something they can use in their business. So I'm
That's right.
excited about that, Eric.
Good stuff. Well, check it out, folks. The open source semantic modeling language is now available and templates. Hop online. They can find it in Git, right?
Yep. Yeah, it goes just look for SML and do a Google search for SML open source and you'll find it.
All right, folks. We'll talk to you next time. Send me an email if you want to be on the show, info@insideanalysis.com. We'll talk to you next time. You've been listening to Inside Analysis.